Hello and welcome to another Smaulgld live stream. Today is Saturday, August 11th, 2018. And it is Economics Saturday night. We're going to talk about what's wrong with artificially low and negative interest rates. And you probably have an inkling what's wrong with them and probably have your own views. But we're going to take a bit of a dive into that topic. But first, let's find out what's happening in the markets today. Markets were closed, but the crypto markets never sleep, and they are open, and the cryptos had been taking a serious beating, but they finally look like they've stabilized, with actually Bitcoin turning higher up to 6,400. It had been down in the 6,000s, and Ethereum had been down almost below 300, back at 326. Bitcoin Cash still under 600 at 574, and Litecoin had dipped all the way down to 55 or maybe even 54. It's at 58.65. We're not sure if this is the end of the heading down or just another leg down. Who knows? But what's interesting is that the Bitcoin market cap is now 51% of all the cryptos out there. The other interesting thing is if you take the top 5, you get about 80% of the value. If you take the top 10, you got 85%. What this is telling me is that a lot of the excess has been wringed out, not just of the big names, obviously Bitcoin going from 20,000 to 6,000, Litecoin from 350 to 58, but that the other coins have just either fallen off their map or have lost 90% plus. So don't know if it's a good sign or a bad sign, because it could be a bad sign if they're just all worthless and these just haven't gotten hit as hard, or it could be a good sign that you have consolidation. You can let me know what you think on the side, but that's not the topic of tonight's discussion. Tonight we're going to talk about what's wrong with these artificially low and negative interest rates. Now you may think, well, that's an old topic because the United States no longer has negative interest rate, never had negative interest rates, and they're raising rates. But one could argue that they're still artificially low. They're still at 175. They're just higher than the other central banks. But we're still living with the consequences of these artificially low interest rates. And artificially, or interest rate setting, actually sets the price of money. And since you have a fiat currency system, setting the price of money, giving it to the central banks, means that they select what the price of money is rather than the market. And that's why you see the fiat currencies being manipulated. You see them doing central bank intervention. And intervention begets intervention, meaning they can't just leave it alone. The more of it they do, the more of it they have to do. So they're at the point now where not only do they buy each other's debt, they're now buying corporate bonds. Some central banks are buying equities. It just never ends. So one of the things about just manipulating interest rates, if that doesn't do the trick and your central bank has been tasked with managing the economy, well, they're going to go a lot further than just fiddling around with interest rates. But when you talk about the central bank having the ability to mess around with interest rates, well, they're political creatures. Ludwig von Mises once said, public opinion always wants easy money. And where do you get that from today? That's low interest rates. And that was from a book he wrote, or portion, I forgot which book it's, so I think it's called Critique of Intervention. So central banks are always going to err on the side of keeping rates low unless they think that they have to raise them, which is different than the market telling them they have to raise them. And generally, the Fed or the central banks can control the price of money as long as the markets follow the central banks rather than let the central banks, quote, lose control. Because if the Fed sets the rates and the market follows the rates, then the market isn't really setting the rate. It's the Fed setting it or the central bank setting it, and the market's following it to the point where they're, in a sense, setting the rate. Now, of course, low interest rates sound good on their face. If you want to borrow money, it's a great thing. You get access to capital, and then if you have access to capital, that means you have more money to spend. It means that your debts are easier to pay off. Stocks and real estate prices rise. So what's the problem, you might ask? Scott Wardell, welcome. The portable mug took up smoking. I'm not surprised. Well, that's Mug Life. There you go. Our Smaulgld. That is the Smaulgld to go mug. So you could take Smaulgld to mug. That is the travel mug. That's available on the Smaulgld website. And I'll put links up later on in the show. But let's get back to artificially low interest rates. As we're saying, people cheer them on, both Wall Street and Main Street, you would think, because who wants to pay a lot in interest? Now, what's interesting is even when interest rates are low, as they have been, tell your credit card company that. They don't care. They don't lower the rate. They charge 15, 18. They go to the state where the usually law allows them to charge as much as they possibly can. But in general, if you have access to credit, you can get something lower on your car loan, your mortgage, and so on. And you would think people would like this. But this is not all good news. In fact, if something is too good to be true, you could probably say, well, then it isn't. So the first thing, and I'm sure most of you know this, but about low interest rates, artificially low interest rates, you stop people from saving. So what's the big deal? If you can get what you want by borrowing money cheap, why do you need to save money? And we'll put that one off to the side for now. But what about it discourages investments by individuals and companies? Now here's where it's going to get a bit tricky. When you normally have a company without this artificially low interest rates, and when you're trying to develop a company, a concept, you want to be profitable, you have to think about how you're going to raise your capital and how you're going to make your company profitable. But when you have these low interest rates, you're less inclined to think that way. Why? Because you could just borrow money and think about how you can get a return on your investment, perhaps without making a profit. And you say, whoa, whoa, whoa. How can you start a company with the idea that you're going to make money by not making money? Well, we've got plenty of examples out there today. Companies that have been in existence for more than 10, 15 years, companies that have been public for a decade or so, they don't make any money. And yet they have high market caps. So why is that? Well, the low interest rates themselves encourage people to invest money, but not necessarily to invest money to make a profit, but to invest money so that they can go public. And when the interest rates are low, and you have other factors involved where the central banks and the monetary policies of other countries want to boost the stock market, not only will the low interest rates attract capital into the market and will buy stocks without profits and drive them higher, they'll also buy them themselves. So if you're a company, your mindset, and you're an owner or you are a shareholder or you're a board member, your goal is to maximize shareholder value. And maximizing shareholder value in the old days meant you turned a profit and then probably tried to authorize a dividend, and then your shareholders would be very happy. Company's doing well, you invested the money properly, you manage the company profitably, and you turn a profit, and you can return some of those earnings to shareholders. But in the environment with lower or negative or zero interest rates, doesn't matter. As long as you have a company that's up and running on the stock exchange, and we can look at some of them, and again, none of this is investment advice because I'm actually saying you can tell where the market's going based on the way things are, because it's not based on profit. So for example, if you look at Tesla's out there, doesn't make any money. And what is Tesla's incentive? Now, I don't know what Tesla does with buybacks, but let's just talk in general about companies. If you have low interest rates, there's no point in investing in your company if the economy is doing okay to improve your products or to hire employees. And the reason you would improve your products or hire employees is because you would think that that investment would help you create more products and eventually make them better at a profit. But if you can invest your cash at low interest rates, you can borrow money and buy your own stock back, you bypass the whole concept of having to manage the company and make it do anything profitable. You just have to make it profitable in terms of the share price. So the artificially low interest rates spur rising stock prices and also rising real estate prices. Just because the house can be bought easier at 1 or 2 or 3% interest rate than it can at 5 or 6 that means that the price of the house can go higher because people can pay, instead of $400,000 for that house, well, with the lower interest rate, they could pay $450,000. Doesn't mean the house is worth any more. It just means that the manipulation of the interest rate made the house more, quote, valuable. Same with the stocks. If a company does precious little reinvestment in the company and spends the bulk of its excess cash, or worse, borrows money to drive the stock price up, that doesn't mean the stock value is higher. It just means they managed to boost the stock price. Now, we mentioned, I skimmed over, well, what about for consumers? You know, they can borrow it less. If they don't have to save, what's wrong with the low interest rates? Well, first of all, as I mentioned, the low interest rates mean that they don't necessarily mean low interest rates. Maybe for car loans they do, maybe for buying a house. But consumer credit is never, ever cheap. Consumer credit is, as we mentioned, if it's credit cards, it's going to be at a very high interest rate. So you're not even going to get the benefit of the low rates. But let's say you're clever and you manage to take out equity in your home and use that to encourage your consumption. So now you have this low interest rate, you can go out and spend a lot of stuff. And you're going to buy stuff like cars and boats, automobiles. You can get a cheap car loan. And you can even buy high-priced speculative stocks. So when money is on sale, so to speak, you spend more of it because you can get it for low interest rates. And when rates are artificially low, it's the same thing with countries. Instead of saving or paying down debt, they spend it. They just lavish their citizens on free stuff. And in the United States case, up until recently, where everything was coming from China, you're spending your money on goods made overseas. So that doesn't help the local economy either. But no worries, that's what the Fed did. They needed to stimulate the economy. And in a way, you can't blame them because that's all they can do. All they can do, and it doesn't mean they should do it. That's like saying all I have is a rifle, so I have to shoot it at whatever I see. But that's essentially what the Fed does. All they can do is manipulate the money supply. They can either print money or they can lower interest rates. And if they can do it, and they have the power to do it, they're gonna do it. The only reason they don't buy stocks to boost the stock price is they're not allowed to do it. But I'm sure they find other ways to indirectly do it. So the low rates cause people to spend in excess of their income, flat straight up. I mean, that's, if you have access to money and it's at a low interest rate and your income doesn't cover what you want, you borrow money. And the low interest rates make you think that, well, if I can borrow money and spend money, the spending is increasing the economy, everything is good. But when you have to pay the money back, there's no corresponding increase in wage to pay for them. Now, what's interesting what's going on in the United States is, and the same people that were complaining that the Fed was lowering interest rates are now complaining that the Fed is raising interest rates. Now, it's similar to once you get an idea in your head, you're against the Fed for lowering interest rates. But then it just becomes you're against the Fed. And then whatever the Fed does, you're against what they do. But the raising of interest rates is actually a good thing. Now, what I'm against is not that they're raising rates. I'm against the sense that the market doesn't control the price of money. But if you have a Fed, and you have to have a Fed, I would argue what they're doing is the right thing. Is they're trying to get rid of this negative, this cheap and free money environment, and while all the other central banks are doing it. But when you have these artificially low rates for such a long period of time, it does boost artificially the stock market, and as we mentioned, the real estate prices. Now, there's this Austrian school of economics, and I follow the Austrian school, that the low interest rates trick entrepreneurs. And it fools them by giving this false signal. And they make these investments that they otherwise would not make. And it leads them to think that the economy is good. They invest money in their business. And it's a false signal because they invest money in the business, but there's no business to be had because the economy is not doing that well. Now, in a normal economy without the stock market, that would be true. So the Austrian economists would say, you're piling money into a venture because you have these low interest rates, you think times are good, you build up your business, and the reaction to your business is tepid because the demand isn't there, and you invested all this money, and now what has to happen? Well, you've misinterpreted the market. You were fooled by the low interest rates, and maybe you go bankrupt, or you have to restructure, you have to lower your expectations, you make less money, you fire workers, whatever it is. However, the reason the Austrians are wrong on this is because we're not dealing with a normal economy in which people enter into business arrangements in order to make a business, to sell products and services, to make money. Why do I say that? Well, you can make money, as I mentioned, by losing money. Companies like Zillow and Netflix and Twitter, they don't make any money. Tesla, they don't make any money, and that doesn't concern them so much. They're not really tricked at all. They know that if they can create a product or service that just looks good, they can build an audience around it, like Zillow has done in real estate. Tesla has developed its fanboys in cars. Netflix has developed a big audience, a big platform. Twitter has a lot of users. Facebook does make money, but it has a 28 PE, and it's not a growth stock. I mean, it's already dominated the world. But these companies realize that they can actually make a lot of money for their venture capitalists when they go public, a lot of money for their shareholders and themselves as directors and officers without ever making money. So I would dare say, when these people saw that we had artificially low interest rates in 2004 and 5 and 3 and 6, whenever they started their companies, they weren't fooled. They knew exactly what was going on. They knew that if they can get these companies to market, that the stock market was going to take care of the rest. And that's what's happened. And if they need more money, they do secondary offerings, and there seems to be unlimited capital available for these companies after they burn through their first 20 million, 50 million, 70, whatever it is that they raise. So the artificially low interest rates assist in this speculation, because I remember a time, and again, this is not investment advice on any of these stocks because they can go up or they can go down, but these kind of stocks 20 years ago would never have been able to go public. They didn't make any money, and they still haven't made any money, and that would have been a non-starter for going public. Generally, as late as the 90s, you had to have 3 or 4 years of profitable history before you thought you can go to an investment bank and say, how do I go public? Well, today, they run them out of the chute out of Silicon Valley, not intending to be profitable, but intending to make a killing from the stock market. So the low interest rates have definitely added to the rise of, we have FANGs, we have unicorn stocks. These are now features of the economic landscape. And I remember, you know, when Bernanke was talking about QE, and I could hear in his voice, it was almost like, this isn't really an emergency tool. This is like a permanent tool. And I've heard central bankers since, they now view quantitative easing as something that's just what you do. So when we have the next recession, yeah, it's just what QE do we do? How low do we take interest rates? The same with negative interest rates. Negative interest rates were just a concept that didn't make any sense. And now they are actually a tool, and central banks have used them. Now, when you have these artificially low interest rates, as I mentioned, you get job growth stunted. Why? Because if you can put money into a company stock to make it go higher, you don't need to hire employees to make your company better. So you can even lay off workers and save the cash on the operating expense and then buy your stock back, and Wall Street will cheer it on. Now, all of this, as you know, creates a type of asset bubble that we've seen. And I would imagine most people are fairly stunned at the stock price, the inexorable rise of the stock price the last 5 or 6 years. It just keeps going up, and everyone says, oh, this is it. I remember 2014, 2015, 2016, the beginning of the year, you have this bad January, you think it's finally over, and then boom, the prices keep rising. And that's a function of the artificially low interest rates. Now, the question is, for the United States, why is the stock market continuing to climb even though the interest rates are rising? Now, maybe the answer is they haven't risen enough, but you would normally think that stock prices would start to slow or come down. And maybe that's the case, but maybe the other case is what we're seeing, that the U.S. is viewed as a safe haven and people are looking at stocks. As odd as it may sound, investing in the U.S. stock market is somewhat of a safe haven. It's dollar denominated. We saw the last day or so the U.S. dollar strongly coming out as the safe haven, gold just managing to hold water, silver going down, and that shows that the dollar is the place to be in this current fiat crisis. Now, that belies all logic and the U.S. debt and so on, but again, that's where we are, I think, in this state of play. And the fact that the U.S. doesn't have zero interest rates and actually has some semblance of a tightening policy is giving further strength to the dollar. Now, this also creates unaffordable houses when you have low interest rates, because, as we mentioned, it's not like the house is $250,000, but interest rates are 7%, so I couldn't afford it. No, now the house, they'll take the interest rates down to 3%, but the house will go up to 325%. So maybe you can afford it, but you're just going to have longer payments, and your payments are going to be greater, and you're going to be in debt, and it's going to make it more likely that you can't make your mortgage payments than if the house was $250,000, you saved the money and you paid your 7%. And of course, this creates the wealth inequality, which the same people who advocate these monetaries are always banging on about wealth inequality, but low interest rates clearly favor the rich and those with assets. Why? They can borrow money cheaply and get more assets and get richer. They can buy more houses, they can buy more planes, trains, and automobiles, they can buy more speculative stocks, they can buy whatever they want, and they can get a return on it. And of course, it punishes the savers. You don't get any interest in the bank when there's these low interest rates. And of course, eventually, they will cause some type of inflation when the imbalances finally wash themselves out and you already have asset price inflation. Someone made a very interesting observation that that the actual inflation, you can view it in terms of the cost of retirement. So if you had, let's say, $250,000 in a bank account back when there was interest rates, and let's just use round numbers, they were never probably this high, but they were back in the 70s. Let's say you had a 10% interest rate, you could make $25,000 a year with your Social Security. You might be able to retire on $250,000. Today, if you have $250,000, you're not even going to get 1% interest rate. You're going to make like, what, $1,800, $1,200 a year on your $250,000. So the inflation there is massive in terms of how much you need to retire. So instead of needing $250,000 to maybe scrap by with your Social Security, you probably need $3.5, $4 million. So I guess that's your inflation right there, even if it doesn't necessarily show up in the way they calculate it with the prices. And then, of course, in order to get these low interest rates, it's not just like they say, oh, the rate is X. They also say they have to print money. They have to flood the market with dollars. And in many cases, that means issuing debt. And the problem with debt means you issue it, and that means you got to pay it back. And what people are complaining about now at the Fed is, well, as they raise interest rates, they're going to have to pay back. They're going to have to service the debt. Well, it's true. And what all this highlights is when you manipulate interest rates, especially to the extremes, you're always going to have to deal with the consequences of what you've done later on. But that's the old kicking the can down the road. And they've managed to figure out how to extend the road, not just to kick the can down it. They've managed to plow through dead ends and keep issuing credit. But that's where we are, and no one knows where it will end, because when you are the one who controls the credit cycle and you control it globally, there is a limit, of course, to what you can do, but also you have, in a sense, limitless power because you can print. And eventually what we might see is you can also forgive debt, you can cancel debt, you can change the terms of the loans. We see that in China already. China used massive amounts of credit, and the reason it's not, a lot of people say, is a big deal because they owe it to themselves, but it is a big deal because it's still debt that has to be paid, but they're still able to keep the wheels on their train by extending loans, changing terms of the loans, changing the debt to equity, canceling loans, And I guess you can do that if it's your own money, but it does create a house of cards type economy where value is not real. Now, that's a separate issue, and that's where we're gonna close off here on the concept of value. A lot of people are clinging to the notion, soundly, logically, to real value, tangible wealth. But over time, what we've seen has been a dictation of value, a changing of the terms. And one of the biggest sleights of hand happened in 1971 and also in 1965. When a government says, okay, the coins that you have, Lyndon Johnson, I read this to you when they did the, in 1965, when they took the silver out of the coins, basically said these non-silver coins are worth just as much as the silver coins. No, they're not. Well, they both say 25 cents on them, so he says they are. Now, yes, people took those out of circulation. However, and though they did eventually gain in value, they did manage to replace the concept that they can dictate value and say, well, that's still 25 cents. Now, we know it's not, but the silver value is worth more. But they also said at the time, and they did for a while, that they would flood the market with silver to make sure that they weren't worth more than 25 cents. So you could have a silver quarter in 1966 not have 25 cents worth of silver in it. And you can have a clad quarter in 1966 with a date on it, 1966. So you got a 1963 quarter and a 1966 quarter. And in 1966, the price of silver wasn't such that the silver quarter was worth 25 cents, probably worth 22 cents. I don't know the number, but it was probably not worth 25 cents. But the non-silver quarter was also worth 25 cents. Now, it probably was worth 2 cents or 3 cents in metallic value. But by doing that, they've actually dictated the value, and they've created a different way of looking at things. Then in 1971, that one was close. That one, but then in 1971, when Nixon said, we're not going to give you gold for the dollars anymore. Now remember, you couldn't as a person, as an individual, go to the bank and bring them dollars and get gold. So already they had not really backed the dollar with gold. It was only central banks that can do it. But when Nixon said you can't get gold anymore at the central bank, I mean at the Treasury, he then went on TV and said, but it doesn't matter. A dollar is still a dollar. No, it's not. But he says it is. He's saying the dollar doesn't need backing by gold. The dollar is based on whatever bugaboo he said it was based on. And that was it. And then people, since then, the dollar's backed by, well, it's because it's based on the productive capacity of the United States. Not that you have a claim on the productive capacity of the United States, but it's gotten worse since then. As I mentioned, even with stock valuations, you couldn't bring a company to public where you didn't have a profit. And now it's like, well, profits don't matter. They really don't. I mean, if for 10 years, if a company can be out there with multi-billion-dollar market cap, they have decided what value is, and value is what they say it is. So what? The company doesn't make money. Now, that is an absurd statement. That is the whole reason why you have value in companies. And you have these companies out there, I named a few of them, 10 years in the public markets, no profits. So why do you own it? And that's why I still don't understand this Tesla. I wish somebody could explain it to me. Why would you take a company private, like Tesla, that doesn't make any money? The reason you take companies private, for example, let's say we had a business and it was making $1 million a year in profit on 10 million in revenue, or maybe even 100 million in revenue. And we went public, and the market cap of the company gave us an 8-to-1 PE ratio. It's trading for like $8 million. And we look at that and we say, we're not getting any benefit out of being a public company. The stock market gains are nothing really for us to cash in our options. The stock is languishing. They don't think we're exciting. We don't have big growth, but we do make $1 million a year. You get your investors together. You say, look, let's just bring this private. And in 8 years, we'll make our $8 million back. We'll buy it out for $8 million. That's what the stock market's valuing it at. And everything after that, we just take home our $1 million a year and we're happy. Or maybe we make some changes and we bring it back to the market a little more profitable. In that sense, it makes sense. The market isn't giving you the valuation that you want, so you take it private. Now, in today's world, what you would do is you would just borrow money and buy your stock back and drive the stock price higher. But that's not that. That's probably what you would do today. But you see, Tesla's not going to do that. They're going to borrow money and buy $400 stock. So what I don't understand about Tesla is, why would you buy that and bring it public? Because it's not like you're going to receive dividends or you're going to get cash flow. You're going to owe a company whose, I think, biggest claim to fame is the stock price. Not the profits or the increased revenue, but the fact that the stock market is what's giving it its value. The fact that the Swiss National Bank will invest in it. And the Swiss National Bank is investing in it because they want the stock appreciation. They know there's no dividend. They know there's no profit. They know there's no hope for a profit, probably. So that's what these artificially low interest rates do, is they tie into this new paradigm of value. And then you go one step further. When you go to these cryptocurrencies, as I mention all the time, they could be worth zero, but in a society or a financial system where value is basically dictated or invented, or just they'll just put their money behind it and say, well, there it is, it's worth whatever we say it is. You could see how Bitcoin got to 20,000. It's the same. If you think about it, Bitcoin is the same Bitcoin. In fact, there's less of it now than there was then. There's more people own it now than there was then. And it's lower. Sure. And it can go even lower. It can go to $10 and go to zero. People could just lose interest in it. Or the money masters, so to speak, can decide, no, it's worth a lot more once it's in an ETF. Even though there's nothing in the ETF, but it's in an ETF, you see. Then it gets its value because it's in an ETF. So basically, you could put a fried cookie in an ETF, monetize that, and people would think that was worth something. Now, I'm not trying to denigrate the Bitcoin, but kind of am. But the point is that the value has gone so far removed from what is tangible or what is at least profitable to, well, whatever it is. We say it is, and Tesla's worth $62 billion. Why? Because they have a CEO who likes to tweet and likes to tell investment analysts that he's not going to answer their questions about profitability. It doesn't make any sense, but that's where we are. And that's why it's hard, I would say, to be, if you were trying to pick stocks, how do you pick in this world? I mean, is it just down to which ones are favored? Because if you were to put these companies down and look at their balance sheets, you'd say, well, this company loses a lot of money and this one loses a lot more, but this one seems to rise. Look at the chart. The chart on this one looks like it goes up higher. I don't know how to do it. That's why I don't do it. But I look at things from a very practical matter. And you would, if you owned these companies and you had the $8 billion to run one of these companies, I don't think you'd buy them for $8 billion because you never make your money back. How could you? Company doesn't make any money. Forget a PE ratio. You're just never going to get your $8 billion back. The only way you're going to get it back is if you bring it back to market and you can convince somebody that somehow it's worth $12 billion now because it's a public company again. All right, let's take a look at the questions that we have or comments. Scott Wardell, the portable mug took up smoking. Yes, he did. Smaulgld to go. Travel mug. So, let's see what else we got. Another CRE. What does that mean? Another CRE underwriting and appraisal guy said the asset inflation in real estate in all classes and industry we watch every day continues. Cap rates down, values up, loan to value ratios and loans up. Yep. Scott says, when borrowing rates correct, no buyers, all sellers. Same as stock market. That's why we watch bond market. Yep, 10 and 30 year. Okay. Sean Saylor, welcome Sean. Greenspan wrote that central banks artificially low interest rates was like putting a penny in the fuse box. Then as soon as he became Fed chairman, he had a super low rate policy. Yes, and Everyone knows that Greenspan also wrote Gold and Economic Freedom back in 1966 for Ayn Rand's newsletter, whatever it was, and how gold prevents the insidious inflation. And then he had nothing to do with it. And also, he also became, I remember this, he became the Fed chair in 1987, I think in June or July, and then you had the stock market crash. Now, Mr. Austrian economist, you would think he'd say, well, let's just get the excess of the system out, and we'll just let it all work itself out, and everything will happen. Well, everything will happen for the better. We might have a little pain. Now, first thing he did was he said, look, we're going to fix this. The Fed. He said what Draghi said 30 years later. He said, we stand ready, willing, and able to inject liquidity into the markets to gain confidence. And I think that was the point, and that's why I mentioned in the top of the podcast that the stock market, in a sense, is a safe haven for, oddly enough, the U.S. has understood, and Greenspan understood, it's not just the dollar that is an asset that needs to be protected, but the stock market as well. That's why you get capital into the United States. Now, when people say, well, the Fed was going to sacrifice the dollar for the market, never, never, never. Without the dollar, you don't have the stock market. It's foolish to even say that the Fed is going to let the dollar collapse. They're going to take rates down. They're going to flood. No. In fact, they got nervous when the dollar index was going down when they were doing QE, so they would stop it. QE1, they stopped and started talking up, stopping it when they saw the dollar index going down too much. Same with QE2. Fed, if they're smart and they know where their bread is buttered, the whole game is based on the dollar. They're not going to destroy the dollar to boost the stock market. Other countries, other currencies will do that. The Fed will not do that. They view the stock market as an asset just like they view the dollar as an asset, but they need to protect both. But if it ever came down to either or, they would sacrifice the market. But the good news is I don't think they have to. I mean, they can always print dollars and or get other countries to print their currencies and put a floor on the market. Scott Wardell, Austrians can be wrong so long as there is crony capitals, insider crooks taking without I can't see what that says, without there you go, without repercussion. Here's the problem with not just it's anybody, Austrians, Keynesians, gold bugs, silver bugs, Bitcoin promoters, mug promoters, whatever it is. Once you believe in a narrative, once you believe that either it's a narrative that gets a result or you believe in a narrative of how things should be done and what happens if you don't do things that way, it's very hard for you to look at anything other than from that point of view. Well, the Austrians would say, okay, but that doesn't mean that they're right. And if everything you start with the conclusion that gold has to go higher because there's too much debt in the system, then all you do is confirmation bias. You cherry pick. I like to say when they do this cherry picking, they're often doing it in the wrong orchard. They're not looking at all the other orchards from which they can pick their cherries because they don't want to. They want to be in the orchard that gives them the feedback they want, and then they pick those cherries. And then they get angry when you point out other facts that don't support its logic. But the thing about it's interesting, economics and investing, you would think, would not have an emotional component, but of course it does. There's money involved, and people are attached now to a narrative that they've already invested their time and money and effort into, like the silver pump story, the gold pump story, the Tesla story, whatever it is. You believe in it, you don't want to hear anything else. And the people that pump these things, they know exactly what to pull out of the hat at the right time to send to you. That's just how things work. And it's very, very hard. I have trouble doing it, to dissociate yourself and look at things as if you were just looking at it for the first time without a predisposition. And the people that get the maddest and the most angry, the ones who are convinced China has this amount of gold and the United States has none. First of all, there's no way they would even know that. They can't know that. But that's what they're starting with. So once you start with a premise that you know a fact, that the fact isn't even knowable, and then because of that, you think something's going to happen. But even if China had 30,000 tons of gold and the United States had none, does it necessarily flow that China takes over the world and the U.S. just goes away? Probably not. Because if it really was that simple, then the United States would just go out and buy gold. It wouldn't be that stupid to allow that to happen. Or it's possible that having that much gold and the value that that gold is worth doesn't mean anything. Or it means something, but it doesn't mean what you think it means. But this is what happens. You can't move away from an idea that you have, which is either something based on a fact that isn't true, or a fact that you can't prove, and the consequences of those unproven facts, or even if they are true facts, aren't necessarily what has to follow. And that's just an insight into how I look at things, because not that I know, but I don't insist. And I certainly don't insist on things like JP Morgan has X number of silver dollars. If I don't know that, I can't insist on that. I can't base, I could speculate if JP Morgan had X number of silver dollars. First question I ask is, why do they have them? But I can't say, well, now I know what they've done with them, and why they've done what they've done with them means this and this and this. That's fine, that's speculation, but you can't insist. And then base your belief system on, I have to follow that story to its logical conclusion when there isn't a logical conclusion. Because you've already had to create facts or assume facts and then assume what flows from those. And that's speculation. There's nothing wrong with speculation, but people do it all the time. They create a narrative and then they insist that everything and every cherry-picked piece of data has to fit the narrative, and they either cherry-pick a piece of data or they massage a piece of data or they invent a piece of data, and that gives them reason to believe that if this happens, because it's happened, because I pulled this data, there's nothing that can contradict it, then this is going to happen. And that's going to result in higher gold prices, higher silver prices, higher mug prices, whatever it is. Scott Wardell, Austrian, okay. I received the eraser, thank you, sir, but what about the mug? Pad, stock prices are a key indicator of the real inflation rate. Yes, I don't know if that's in response, but I was saying that, well, stock prices and bond prices, real inflation has never been below 10% annually since 1999. I don't know if that's the right number, but it's definitely higher than they say it is. Price inflation. Scott Wardell, Lewis, you point out that ICOs must become captive under our never vigilant SEC. Put Martha in jail, leave Jamie alone. Will the rule of law return under Trump? Think he's for real? I think that there's an app. Well, did you know that, you know who's in charge of the SEC or was? Peter Strzok's wife. I mean, this is how deep this is. I don't know if she still is, but she definitely was someone in the SEC. I think there's probably always been, I mean, they're humans that run these things. We've never had 100% rule of law. There were abuses in the FBI supposedly under Hoover. It was wiretapping Martin Luther King. I mean, it's not like this is new. Anytime you have organizations, SEC, IRS, CFTC, any of the alphabets, and people have a certain amount of power, and whether it's politically driven or just personally driven, they're going to use it. And there is a level of bias. I don't know what Martha Stewart had done to be on the wrong side of people. I don't know what her politics were. But clearly, I think the reason they went after her was because it was a big name. Now, I don't remember who the prosecutor was. It might even have been Mueller. I don't know. But again, you gain a name for yourself for having a high-profile case and getting her to lie about something. I guess that's a big deal. So will the rule of law return under Trump? Think he's for real? It's interesting. The only way that Trump or anybody can ensure the rule of law is by actually acting outside of the law and going in and like firing everybody, and which I suppose is their prerogative, but that would appear to be looking like outside of your scope. It would look like you were trying to obstruct justice. See, Trump's issue is, let's say there was none of this Russian collusion story, but there was an issue with bias and not rule of law. in that case, and he was a populist, and he got elected because to get rid of all that stuff, and he didn't have the opposition, which is largely in place because half the country believes he colluded with Russia and that the FBI needs to be left alone. But let's say that didn't exist. He was never the guy. Let's say it's not Trump. It's just some guy who did not have an issue with the FBI. And he goes and he decides he's going to clean up. Well, then that president could, because these offices are under his control. He could go in and clean house. In fact, Bill Clinton, not that he got elected to do this, but he did fire all of his attorney generals. They weren't after him at the time. It was just 1992. He got elected in 93. He comes in. He figures he wants his own people in. Now, there's a difference between cleaning house and putting in your own cronies, which is probably what Clinton did. I don't know. But if there's an existing... I don't think he fired everyone because he thought they were corrupt. I think he just fired them because he wanted his own people in. And then they become corrupt because if you have only your own people in there, they can all work together and eventually they get corrupted. So I don't know if he's for real, if what you mean by that, but I think his first and foremost, he's trying to put this Russian thing behind him, and I don't know what he's going to do. Look, if his attorney general is Rod Rosenstein, basically, because Sessions has been recused, and Rosenstein is the one who signed the FISA warrant, and he's the one who told Trump to fire Comey. I don't understand how he's not conflicted in being in this. That's the whole thing. They're all part of it. And then Sessions is out because he talked to a Russian. All right. Pad. Real estate could be good income for retirement, but the amount of work needed to keep costs in line can more often not become a drag on your retirement. Yeah, you get the wrong rental property, you get somebody who doesn't want to pay your rent, and I suppose you're hosed. 71 was a true default by the U.S. default, just another term for bankruptcy. Well, it was a default to the extent that and the terms of the default were you're going to get dollars now, and the dollars are going to be worth just as much as the old dollars. So it was a restructuring on the spot on television with Richard Nixon. The biggest companies with no profit, such as the FANG stocks, were all seeded by the government. Well, that's right. And they got subsidies. I don't know about all of them, but they got subsidies to go into business. So in their sense quasi-governmental, and therefore they're backed. Because there is a relationship. I mean, it was a joke like 7-8 years ago that Facebook was basically a CIA operation. But most people can see now that, well, that's where all the data is. And if you want data on people, you want to track what people are doing, you go to Facebook. Silicon Valley is known for that. And let's see what else. All right, let's see. Kermash, impossible to pick the top or bottom. 10-year bull run, I'm out. Going into gold and silver, buy high, buy low. If I'm a little early, that's fine. It's been an awesome 10-year run. Whoop, whoop. Well, if you managed to be in it for 10 years and then you're getting out, you've probably done well. Gold price not going up, and in Venezuela, Argentina, Turkey, and 10 other countries screaming up. Yes, we covered that the other night. I showed charts on that. And everyone's saying, well, these countries are buying gold because they know what is coming. They are smart. They're ready for the reset. No, they're not. Most of them have their own gold mines. Most of them have horrendous currencies that are getting worse. They're just trying to hold on to some value by buying gold. Now, that is the reason why many people buy gold, is to hold value. And the reason the value you're holding is against the currency that you use. Now, if the value of your currency is the dollar and gold is down versus the dollar, you really aren't preserving value, at least temporarily, by having gold. So you would have lost value. The dollar is actually worth more than gold this year. That's a fact. There's some years that it's not and some years that it is. Now, for Turkey, gold has been worth more than a lira for years. A lot more. And a lot more this year than it was last year. So, all right. All is one. No mug yet. Yes. Well, then that is coming from the shipment center, and you should have something from the company. But again, let me know if that doesn't come. But I'm sure it will. And Bumblebee, are we going to reach peak mug anytime soon? I don't think so. I mean, they're rare and everything, but they're produced to meet demand. By the way, before I close, and thanks everyone for joining me tonight. Remember to go over to BitChute and the other places where I post. Really, the best place is to go to Smaulgld, because not only will you can get your mug there, but you can sign up and be on the mailing list, which I send out a few times a week. I don't send every blog post I put out, but did you see Bullion deals are now promoting home bullion storage insurance? Sounds cheap. Still looking into it. Anyone know much about it? Don't know anything about it. I know they offer, which I think a lot of people don't like this idea. I like it. I think it's good. It's like you buy the bullion and they ship it to Brinks or to a, and then you have a custody agreement with them. And then you don't have to, you insure it there, and you don't have to have it at your house. All right, so go to smaulgld.com. I don't know if that link works, so let me give you another one. If you go to smaulgld.com, you can order your mug. You could become a Smaulgld patron. You can sign up for Smaulgld. And also, you can follow, let's do the Steam It and Mines. Sign up for those too. It's good for yourself to be on these other platforms. No, I know what you're talking about. It's home storage. I know exactly. Yes, I saw that. It's not the same thing as sending your gold away, storing it somewhere else, and being insured there. It's getting a policy on what you keep at home. But I don't know anything about it. Mines. Let's try Mines. That's another new platform I'm on. Also, if you don't follow me on Twitter, that's probably where I have the most followers. So that's just at Smaulgld. And that'll be about it. So thank you very much, and we'll be back tomorrow night at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Thanks for joining.